Okay, so back with part 2 of the July reading wrap. I didn't finish as many books as I thought for this part. I thought I'd have at least 8. I have 7 though, which is good. So in all we had 15 books for July. I guess, yeah. We had 15 books for July, and let's do the other 7. We did 8 already. Let's do the other 7. The first in this part is Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. So this was a really short book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a good book, very entertaining. I liked that it was short. I literally, I think at the time I chose to read this, I just filtered in the Libby app by audiobook, and then I looked for the short. I just scrolled in the books I'd marked as, wanted to read, and looked for the shortest I could find, and I think this was like 4 hours, maybe. It definitely wasn't 5 hours long. So I liked it. I believe it's supposed to be part memoir, part novel, and it is very it's a commentary type book, but it's still fiction, and it's still narrative, and it still manages to make remarks about social structure and in Hollywood, which is an interesting place because we know when we watch movies we see Asian characters. This is set in the US, in California. We know we see Asian characters, East Asian characters, so Chinese, Japanese, Korean, but we don't actually, they're Chinese, Interior Chinatown, but I think this would apply to other East Asian groups as well. So we tend to see them in film, but we don't actually think about some of the issues they go through. I'm Black, so I know I've heard about the challenges Black actors face in terms of getting roles and being typecast, and apparently it's very similar. This book is basically saying it's very similar for East Asian persons. And so there's this, it takes a perspective of the of first person of this guy who wants to be kung fu guy, and this is how they refer to them in films. So you have your credits and they have a role. The role is kung fu guy with the name of the actor, and basically every Chinese kid growing up, every male Chinese kid wanted to be that, and every girl not necessarily wanted to be but ended up being hot Chinese Asian girl, whatever, until they grew older, and then they became old Asian wise man or old Asian restaurant owner or something. So very, very typecast, and there were only so many roles. Most of the roles were actually non-speaking roles, and I think that might happen a lot today. I was, after I read this book, I was scrolling on Twitter and I came across Manny Jacinto, an actor who was in I don't know if you've ever watched The Good Place. It was a funny show. I think it was a little anticlimactic at the end, but it was really good while it lasted. You should look it up if you haven't, for like a sitcom, something you can like watch, mindless TV, so he played this really dumb character in that show, but it was a departure from the ordinary, but he's since been cast into some current roles, action, like he was in one of the Top Gun movies, and I'm kind of digressing, but the point is that he's been speaking about basically this the limited types of roles that he gets as an Asian man, and obviously he wants more for himself. So this book was pretty much a commentary about that, and how this boy grew into a man, and his father was kung fu guy, and trained him, and he wanted to be kung fu guy, and then the dad I think in the end became like an alcoholic because they weren't able to make ends meet basically, and they also did the regular restaurant work. The mom, the parents separated in the end, and which I believe a lot of that happens sometimes with Asian families, where they might live together but they're not actually romantic, or they might separate, whatever, but they're very much like functional families. And so it was just really interesting to see that perspective, and it was fit into like a really short book, and it was one of those books that was what they call meta. So it's like talking about itself. As it's talking to you, it's talking about itself and criticizing itself and stuff like that. And I thought it was done. I don't mind. Sometimes these tools, these literary tools, can get really cheesy, but I don't mind it if it's done well. You know, I'm not like, oh my god, it's meta, turn it off, that's so annoying, you know. So I think because it spoke about a specific character, but not in like a very broad narrative. So it had, you know, a storyline, but it for me couldn't pass a 3-star because it didn't feel that developed, and it wasn't meant to be, right? It was just meant to be like a really short, it's like somebody wanting to talk about themselves creatively without having a super long monologue, you know. And I think that was really cool. I think if you really hate talking about yourself, for example, and you want to write a memoir, that could be a really cool way to do it. It's like find a relevant narrative and turn it into a story, even though it's about yourself and your life and your family dynamic. So that was a really it was different, it was memorable. Definitely won't forget that one. And it's something I might read again just to see the way it was written. Not so much for the story, but the way it was written. The second book is Come As You Are, The Surprising Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life. And this is by Dr. Emily Nagoski. So this book I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought I didn't necessarily read it because I wanted to transform my sex life. I read it because I was curious, and this person is coming from a scientific background and a psychological background. And I think that was one of the cruxes of this book, was that sex, as we think about it, isn't just a physical act, but it is about, and you know, what makes someone feel sexual attraction or be in the mood for sex and so on isn't purely on physiology, but is also a part of psychology. And basically that, which we know, but the way she presented the studies and the way she presented what she has studied for many years and taught in university for many years now is, you know, it's a combination of being mentally ready as well as being physically ready and attracted to somebody, which I think a lot of women experience, and men don't so much. Men kind of, their arousal kind of means you're ready to go, whereas women's arousal takes a little bit longer, and it might not necessarily mean ready to go if they're stressed about kids or stressed about work. And men go through that, I think, more so with like money. When they're stressed about money, if they're the typical provider type, you know, it might affect their libido or whatever. But anyways, this book has something for everybody, and I mean everybody, even asexual people, even people who are not attracted to women, or I shouldn't say women, people with female reproductive organs. I think that this book talks about consent, it talks about anatomy, it talks about psychology, it talks about human decency, and I think the way the author wrote this book was not preachy. Sometimes when you know you're right and you have science to back it up, you also get very kind of like preachy and like, what's the word, like lecture, like, you know, you're lecturing someone, which she has every right to do. She literally teaches this in university. She talks about mindfulness, and she talks about just different things. She gives anecdotes, I like that she uses for real women who have experienced different things, and she gives them aliases, of course, but to use their real life examples for some of the things that they talk about in same-sex marriage, in different sex marriage, and relationships and so on, with kids, no kids, that kind of thing, the dynamics. And one thing that she stresses a lot in this book is, you know, all women are normal despite how their sexual, how their arousal appears, how their vaginas appear, how their sexual organs appear. And I think that is something that, yes, people know hypothetically, but in a world where there's like porn everywhere and it's kind of subversive, you can't scroll online without it popping up, and you have to sometimes actively block accounts. You get to understand that, like, no, the way you're made is actually normal. You just need to figure yourself out, type thing. So I thought that was really cool, and I think it's the kind of resource that you could use for sex ed, you know, if you had it to a certain point. But the very beginning is kind of like, let's start from scratch. What are the female reproductive organs? You know, what are they for? You know, what's the vulva? What's the vagina? We say vagina, we really mean vulva, that type of thing, you know. So it was really good and informative, and that's why I got 4 out of 5 for me. And the cover is so clever. I love a good cover, and the narration was really good. The audiobook had music, which apparently she composed, so she had like a side quest within this, which is to have musical intros and outros to the classical music intros and outros to the book, which is really cool. And there was like a male narrator who came in every now and then and did particular parts, and it was very entertaining. So she also, while talking about something serious, did not take herself too seriously, and I liked that. Okay, so the next book we have is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. So Ali Hazelwood, for me, writes excellent romances. I've read at least 4 or 5. This might be number 4, number 5. I do have a favorite, is Love Theoretically, which I reviewed a couple months back. I got a physical copy and everything. That one is my favorite of all of them I've read. This one is a departure from the rom-com, which she writes really well. Within romance, this lady is like just playing the field. She's doing young adult, she's doing rom-coms, she's doing science-based romances, and this one is an erotic romance, and it's a little bit darker. Now, by erotic romance, it does not mean just straight erotica, like it's not just like, you know, steamy scenes left, right, and center. It is not. There is a very dark undercurrent and an erotic undercurrent throughout the book, but it is not like straight up out the bats, like bam bam wham bam thank you ma'am. It is not that. It deals with darker topics. It's not a thriller, it's not a suspense, but she's talked about serious things. She's talked about food insecurity, which is something that a lot of people struggle with, and you tend not to think about unless you're actually going through it, or have gone through it. She talks about, as ever, the academic. She talks about, you know, people stealing intellectual property, and she talks about, you know, what that's like, why there are many people who enter graduate school, postgraduate school, and never finish. Sometimes because they decide not to, sometimes it's for reasons outside of their control. And in this book, you know, that was part of the backstory. The characters, the way they meet was different too. They met through a dating app, and I thought that was she writes modern, you know, contemporary books, but I think previously they've all been in proximity in academic space, you know, they're like at the same university, that type thing. They've seen each other around, and this was a little bit more of I'm meeting you today and wow, you know, type thing. So I don't want to give too much of this book away, but I will say that as much as it wasn't my favorite of hers, I really appreciate how she's able to talk about important topics. You know, in Love Theoretically, I spoke before. She talks about somebody, a young person having diabetes and trying to afford medication for that. That's so real. Like, you know, romance can talk about real things amidst all of that, because these are, you know, supposed to depict real people or things that could happen to everyday people. In this case, also, or not in this case, in her books, what I love, her secondary characters, her supporting characters, you know, the friends, the banter between the main couple is always elite with her, but the friendships are always excellent. And she writes minoritized characters, meaning characters who are typically for oftentimes social reasons, which is why you say minoritized characters, or, you know, it's easier to say minorities, racial minorities. They are not giving, you know, token. They're not giving superficial. They're giving real life people who in this case, you know, like her best friend, the main character's best friend was a black woman, also with a PhD, and, you know, they grew up together, and, you know, obviously the black woman was like well off or had a comfortable middle class life, and the main character did not. And, you know, it's not about, you know, social class, but I just appreciate when a character who isn't of a particular race can just like be a normal person and get over themselves, and write characters who they don't personally identify as, with characteristics that are not suppressed, you know, or seemingly like, hey, why can't she also have a PhD and be a scientist? Why does she have to be the secretary? You know what I mean? So I really appreciate that about her writing as well. And that's all I will say on that book. Okay, so book number 3 is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maehrer. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It's apparently supposed to be number 1 in a 3-part series, I think, but it's a series that follows the same characters. It's a continuation. And with that, I will start by saying I have no problem with books, with authors wanting to be shows, their books to become shows, but please write your book as if you're writing the book for the reading audience, and not like you're writing it to be a Netflix series. I don't like when books, pet peeve, I don't like when books are obviously trying to become a series. This book was written that way. Sometimes the first hint is when it's a series, but the series doesn't. I don't see series and automatically think, okay, yeah, you want to be a show. But in this case, the cliffhanger at the end, you know, and I have no problem with cliffhangers. If it's written well, I will go and read all 3, 5, 7, 9 books if it is written well. I do find, however, that the peak, the maximum for a series to be done, really, I think Julia Quinn was extraordinary. She wrote 8 books in a series without dropping the ball in any single one. Mind you, I have not read 7 and 8, but I imagine that they're not, like, she did not drop the ball. Usually when you read series that are anything past 5 installments, the quality of the writing, the quality of the storytelling is just like, it just downward as you read each book. And I think 3 is perfect. Do what you need to do, say what you need to say. You can make each link without, and have them be unique, and have them have the right length. You know, that's another thing you'll see the books just get shorter and shorter. You started out with a regular 300 to 350 page book, and you end up with like a 250, you know, 214. So you get novellas in there. Why do we have just, anyways, it's fine. So I was thinking that I would give this a try. I saw it was very popular, and even it had, you know, when the books are really popular, so the library has a ton of copies. It doesn't take too long to get a copy. And I heard it was popular on TikTok, but I don't use TikTok like that to know, like that frequently, to know what's hot on Book Talk. And what I found with the Book Talk books is they tend to be geared towards the kids who are on TikTok all the time. So I'd say college age and younger, maybe like high school, so young adult. And this is definitely giving young adult in terms of the way it was written. The way it was written, it had a lack of literary finesse. I wouldn't be surprised, and it's not because of age, but I just wouldn't be surprised if this was a college age student or recent graduate. Honestly, even a high schooler who wrote this, because it had very little metaphorization. And a metaphor is on the scale of literary tools and writing tools, it's the simplest, right? So instead of saying that, she had the blackest of black eyes, you might say her eyes resembled the beadiness of a mouse or a rat skulking about in a dark kitchen, right? That's one of the easiest ways to enhance your writing, right? Creative writing. And those I could probably count on my hand in the whole book, those that were used, and they were very, very common and obvious. So I say this book was written in a very pedestrian way, both in terms of the pacing of the book, but also in terms of the language it was used. It was very elementary, and it wasn't terrible. I didn't give up. I don't believe in hate reading. So if I hate the book, I am gonna stop reading it and just mark it as DNF. But it wasn't DNF. And it was interesting enough, but it didn't need to be, like, if they took the curse words out and removed some of there were no steamy scenes, but they were like building up to that. And again, one of the things is like, okay, look out for part 2 if you want to see them like actually get together, which is fine. Don't make it so obvious. You can read the next one, but it's not, if you remove those and remove the language that was a little bit more adult, it could be a YA book. Like, there's nothing about it that made it adult. There were no complex themes, nothing like that. There was a kind of morality theme, but it didn't, morality in the sense that this guy's a villain and the premise is that this girl is going to work for him as his assistant, and okay, you can kind of guess the trope from there, right? It's a proximity trope, so they're gonna fall in love because they're close together all the time, working together. Okay, I didn't hate it, but it's not brilliant. Even the fact that it's kind of a fantasy series too. Even with that, it wasn't, with fantasy you could do anything and justify it, right? But even with that, it's so basic, you couldn't even be like, whoa, and the way they wrote this thing, I'd never imagined that before. Take me somewhere new. If you have fantasy at your disposal, take me somewhere I've never been before, please. But anyways, it was fine. So book number 5 is Highland Justice by Heather McCollum, and this is part 3 of a 4-part series, Sons of Sinclair. And so 2 books went before, I had not read them, and there's one after I do not know if I will read. This book surprised me. I did not expect to like it this much. I read it late at night thinking, okay, I can't go to sleep, I'll just read something, let's see what I have in my in my library. And I was so surprised. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because the characters, first of all, I like when the men can't control themselves, not in a sexual way, but in a, like, the yearning. Okay, he's a yearner. So it's a family of boys, of sons. He's number 3, and each of them have a role. His name's Gideon, and it's the biblical reference in that he's like the judge, jury, executioner type. The final son, he's like the one like that kills people. I think the one earlier was of war, and the one before, the four horsemen, that's the word, that's the thing, the four horsemen. So their dad raised them that way, so they were all raised really strictly and like as warriors in this role, and they're Scottish, and they're in the time of which king was that? I can't remember which king that was. It wasn't David. It was one of those that like, yeah, I can't remember which one it was, but he was they were always trying him, you know, and this family of men, they were strong enough. The dad actually intended to challenge the king and take over Scotland and England, but anyways, they decided they didn't want to do that. So the two older brothers are married off already. This guy, he, you know, if there's any crimes that go on in the any crimes, any disputes, he's the man. So that's one of the things I liked when he met this lady who she stole from him because she's a widow. She's young, but she's a widow. She had a terrible husband who told her she was a cold fish, and because she didn't have a child for him, but probably he was the problem. But anyways, she pretty much got like put out young and, you know, sent off with this guy, and she took her younger sister in and said, I'll never let this happen to you. And she took in a few orphans as well. So she basically runs an orphan home, but she's also young, mind you. And so she sees him one day and she steals from him, and she feels really badly about it in the town. Like, she picks his pocket. So she goes to the castle to return the thing and gets caught in his room. And he now has to sentence her. And one of the things that I liked was she challenged him, like, not necessarily in this order, right, but one of the things she challenged him on was, why is he the only person who decides if it's right or wrong? And his thing was, I've studied, it was my job growing up to study every single book, every single law, every single historical leader figure, adjudicator figure, whatever it is. I know every case inside out. So I am equipped, I am knowledgeable, I am like the person who should do this. And she was like, no, but if it affects a whole town, you should be able to, there should be a jury basically. And in the end, yeah, he listens to that and lets the town people help to decide these kinds of matters. But he has to punish her because she's caught stealing. And there's some other minor characters there's a guy who she turned down, who he was very vindictive towards her. So when they were supposed to get, you know, goods from the laird, or he's the laird basically, he, you know, they weren't getting it, so they were kind of out there starving, which is why she stole in the first place. And it was kind of them circling each other, you know, as they go about their business, and she's trying to raise his kids, and he wants to know more about her, but he also doesn't want to be obvious because of who he is. And like, you know, she has this talent that she just does to get away, and, you know, he finds out about it. And then my memory card was full and I lost my train of thought, so I'm gonna start somewhere else. But yeah, this book, he had to reconcile within himself that he wanted to break the rules for her. She was challenging him not necessarily to break the rules, but she criticized, you know, some of the things that made him feel like he had the right to solely judge everybody in the town. And she was, you know, doing her own thing. She was raising kids with the help of somebody in the town, and she took in someone who was previously exiled from the town, and like, you know, she was dealing with a stalker in the end. And he kind of was having to, as much as he was a, you know, like an important man in their society, like, she was doing so much more socially. And, you know, she was also dealing with all these other things, you know, as a woman wanting to, you know, having been told that there's something wrong with her, and, you know, him feeling like he needs to show her that there's nothing wrong with her. So this was a really nice book. I enjoyed it. I would read it again. I don't, and even though I feel that way, I don't know that I'll read the next one over other books in my TBR. But yeah, I enjoyed it. This next one is called Crying Wolfe by Kerrigan Byrne. I like Kerrigan Byrne. This is the Good Girl series. This isn't my favorite series of hers. This is number 5 in that series, and it's a series of siblings and half siblings who, you know, found the dad had 2 wives basically. One wife first, and he had kids with them, and then went off and got married to somebody else while he was still married, and so they're a scandal in themselves. And this is one of the youngest girls, I believe. And there's a guy, she's the next door, there's a house, and it's bought now by this guy that comes in from America, and they call him Midas because everything he touches turns to gold. And he's in mining and all of that, and he's older though, she's younger, and most times age gap romances creep me out. Sometimes it's done, you know, and it's less creepy, but I don't know, something about it most times just makes me feel a little weird. This was one that, even though I had that apprehension at first, I was like, okay, I get it. It's not the end of the world. So she has a little problem with stealing for some reason. I don't know if she would officially be called a kleptomaniac, but she steals things in times of significant emotional distress, small things, unnoticeable things. And she goes next door. It was owned by somebody previously. She doesn't know it's been now purchased by this man who's in town on business, and she steals something and gets caught. And not only does she get caught by him, when she returns to her house, she gets caught with a man in her room who was only trying to basically go back over there and get whatever he thought she stole. And then someone else is there who's like outside of their family and one of those like super proper people. And so here we are, shotgun wedding, forced to marry each other. They, you know, make it work. This wasn't a long book, by the way. This was one of those I think was like less than 250 pages. Again, victim of serialization, because I think there are like 2 more books after this one in the series, but they're not out yet. They're supposed to be coming, I think. What do I want to say about this? Honestly, it would have been a 3, and I hate to be that girl, but there was a scene in a closet, and this is after it was like a makeup. It was kind of like a breakup. It was a breakup and makeup at the same time. So he also has trust issues because he's so rich, everybody else wants something from him and they always take from him. Somebody's always taking from him, and he's had to fend for himself for a long time. And he comes to find out that she does the same. So he leaves her. He goes to this event, and she finds out where he is, and she goes. And he came there to acquire something, and I'm telling the story, but I would still read it. You know, if you were interested, still read it, because even though I'm telling you, the way it develops would still be worth reading. So she goes to steal it back for him, because that's what she does. She steals, right? He doesn't even know that's what she does, because they're fighting and they have this scene. And they're searching the house. It was giving at one point like one of those Oceans books, you know, where they're stealing something, and it's like, or what's that book with Jesse Eisenhower? Not book, that movie, Now You See Me. And there's that scene where they're like moving the item around and you don't know where it is. All of them in a circle. It was kind of like one of those, and they're being searched, and it was one of those. And for that reason, like that small section, that how many few pages of the whole book made it 4 stars for me. And that is why authors feel like they can do 7-part books, because if you give them just one memorable scene, it makes it worth it. I think that's the logic. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work. So anyways, on the strength of that, pretty much, it got 4 stars for me. It was memorable. And I kind of am like, oh, 4 stars. There's so many more deserving books. But no, literally, if the author wrote it that well that I felt like this was a mid book and not one scene made it a 4, then kudos to you, boo. And the last of this July reading wrap, part 2, 15 out of 15 book, is Yinka, Where Is Your Husband? And this is by Lizzie Damilola Blackburn. So this is a UK based book about a young woman in her 30s. And off the bat, was this a blind read? It was a blind read. That's been my thing lately. Sometimes, no, when I'm bored, when I feel ennui, I tend to mark books when I hear about them on my app, Libby app. I have a little tag that I use for books I'm interested in reading. And if it's available, if I'm bored and it's available, it's not too long, I might go by the cover. Sometimes I might read the description. But as long as it's in a genre I like, which is usually romance, sometimes fiction, as long as it's not thriller or suspense, I'll just try it. And this one I liked the cover, so I was like, let's have a go. Yinka, Where Is Your Husband? This book, at first, when I first started it, it reminded me of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, which was number 1 in the first part of this reading wrap, July last video. But this one was better. This one was less life happening to a girl and more of life is happening to a girl and she's fighting back. And she's saying, you know what? I like my hair like this. I don't need a weave. I don't need lightning creams. There's so many books like this. So many Eat, Pray, Loves, whatever it is. There's so many books like this. A woman is deciding, I'm enough. They're fighting back at, the barbs their family takes. In a Nigerian family, in a black family, whatever it is, in an Irish family, in an Italian family, they want to know when you're going to get married, when you're going to have kids, whatever it is, especially past 30. They're always trying to set you up with someone. And especially if you're from a Christian background. And that was one of the things she talked about. This girl was like traditional Christian, like saving herself for marriage and all that, and dating, trying to figure out dating apps. If you're in your 30s, late 20s, and you're kind of in that state, you're kind of freaking out, where am I gonna find somebody? Or even if you're happy being single and just letting life, take you, I know it will happen eventually, and your family is like, they won't shut up about it. They're praying for you in front of everybody and embarrassing you and asking, where is your husband? This is a kind of book you'll enjoy, and it won't just be which was my gross with Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. It was just, it's so, life is happening to me. My friends are awful, but we're friends and we're gonna figure it out, and I love them. I'm awful too, sorry, not just my friends. We're awful to each other, and then I want to have a baby. Will I have a baby? My ex is trash. And there's a resolution, but it's a serial book, so you have to read the next book to find out. It's very much giving soap opera. Nothing wrong with that. Some people like that. This book was a little bit more, yes, one, self-contained, but also more hopeful, even as things were happening. Even if she never, ended up with someone, she found herself and she felt, she came back to her confidence. It talks about following your dreams. You know, you might be leaving, you know, corporate to do volunteer work, or you might be leaving corporate to do artist work. It's work, yeah, not completely not trying to have a salary, but if you know it's your life's passion, and you know your the soul is slowly being sucked out of you in whatever job you're in now. It talks about those kinds of things. You know, it talks about when you have cousins and the moms pit you against each other, the moms make snide comments. It talks about, you know, the friend who went to college and the friend who didn't go to college, and how their lives might diverge, or who got married because they got pregnant, and who actually yeah, the ex who you wanted to come back to you, and then when they came back you're like, no, I really don't want to. You know, it talks about these things that really happen without being overly melodramatic and unrealistic and a turn off. And I think the last thing I'll say on this book, I gave it 4. There were times, 2 things. One, there were a couple of times it was like slap your knee funny. It really was, because the characters were hilarious. The ensemble was just, they had moments, and it was a strong ensemble of characters. The last thing I'll say is I really liked that there was this element of selflessness about some of the characters who were their characters, but I really liked reading it. They volunteered at a homeless shelter, so they'd feed the homeless, and I think humanity isn't always kind and selfless, and I liked that it was written in a book, especially in novels, in fiction, where it's their job to entertain you, and writing about something like that isn't necessarily entertaining, right? It gives depth to a character, it aids a plot line, but it doesn't necessarily make you ooh and ah the way somebody cheating on somebody or a plot twist might. You know what I mean? So I liked that this element of humanity was included for these people. Treating homeless persons like people. Sometimes, especially in developed countries, where it can be very easy to feel far away from. You can be on the cusp of homelessness and you can feel very far away from it, like could never be me. I think that the author did a good job of bringing that in, and it's a small detail, but I really enjoyed that. I like when books bring elements of human nature that are often overlooked and not included in novels, which can be fantastical because they are meant to entertain. So yeah, that was a good book. I think if I had to recommend one fiction book out of this batch, I would recommend, do you know what? I'd recommend Interior Chinatown. No, I'm gonna cheat. Non-fiction Interior Chinatown, because it wasn't fully fiction. It was like a fictionalized biography. So that would be my non-fiction book. And then for fiction, I'd recommend, oh, but Come As You Are is so good. Alright, I'm gonna cheat. 3 books. Come As You Are. If you have female reproductive organs and you or are attracted to females, you know what? If you're a human being, you should read that book for your education. And Yinka, Where Is Your Husband, I think was a really good perspective for women and things women go through in their early 30s if you're not already attached. And even if you are you're starting to think about your career, you're starting to set paths, whether it's a set career or a set long-term relationship, or the people around you are having that and managing your family relations. I'd recommend that book. And I'd recommend Interior Chinatown. Those are good books. So, that's July. I'll see you in August. August is going to be I'm a teacher and school starts again, so we're preparing for that. And so I don't know what August is going to look like, but my TBR, I have books that I'm in progress with, and I have books that I need to finish deadlines. I have 2 advanced reader copies, so there should be a video in August. I mean, we're over halfway through the year now, so we'll keep reading, but let's try. My thing is, I hope it will be on time. But anyways, we're gonna make it work. We're gonna be on time, and we'll talk about books in August. So have a good August until I see you.